Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this essay, I want to clarify two things. This video has major spoilers for basically everything in The Gifted. Please, if you have not watched this series and don't want to be spoiled, do not watch this video. Finally, this video contains both praise and criticism, but I was personally disappointed by this series. So, with that being said, if you thoroughly enjoyed The Gifted Graduation, I'm extremely happy for you. Don't let me spoil your fun. You are responsible for the content you consume. Thus, if you do not wish to hear possible negative aspects about this series, I also encourage you to sit this one out. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump right into our first section. Was largely a disappointment due to his lack of energy this season. He seemed like a husk of what he once was in the original series, as he was originally much more animated, emotional, clever, and funny. Maybe this is because he was supposed to have matured after the first season, but I honestly just found him quite dull. His whole character was just focused on furthering the revolution and giving lengthy monologues, and there really wasn't room for much else. Save his bond with Wave, there really wasn't much effort put into maintaining the bond between Pang and his friends. 80% of the interactions between Pang and his friends were just them fighting. I really wish there were more moments that cemented his relationship with the gifted class, just like we had in Season 1. Wave was really the only character from the original season who was improved upon. I enjoyed his character in Season 1, but I'll confess, I'm like in love with Wave's progression, from a cold-hearted calculating loner to a compassionate, albeit awkward dork. His character progression is ingenious, and honestly makes a lot of sense considering the events of the first season. I adore how Wave is written. He's new to all this relationship stuff, but he'll do anything to help his friends. He was definitely the show stealer for me this time around, and I really think Chimon did a fantastic job of giving us this new and improved version of Wave. Ohm's characterization genuinely upset me. I don't know what happened, but I feel like whoever wrote Ohm in this season didn't actually watch the original series. That sounds harsh, but Ohm was one of my favorite characters, and he brought so much more than comedic relief to the table. Ohm is incredibly powerful and complex. Sure, he acted as the comedic relief in the first season, but he had his own arc about learning the value of friendship, which effectively created a balance of comedy and character. I also got the feeling from Season 1, Episode 3 that he was either autistic-coded or neurodivergent-coded, since he didn't pick up on social cues and tended to misplace his belongings. But here's what really upset me about Ohm in Season 2. His character in this season is 99% of the time simply comedic relief. Season 2 is chock full of his so-called friends making jokes about him being stupid, and it really grinds my gears. First, the jokes are excessive and really not all that funny. And Ohm isn't stupid. When he is given that opportunity to showcase his powers in episode 11, he proves himself to be one of the most clever and powerful members of the group. It broke my heart that Ohm was watered down to the token dumb friend. I may have lied when I said Wave was the only character who was improved upon in The Gifted Graduation. When I briefly mentioned The Gifted in my 3 Will Be Free video, I alluded to my opinion that Kon needed a whole lot more development. As of Season 1, I thought he was definitely one of the weaker characters in terms of writing. He had potential, and I think the seeds for him to rebel against Pang were effectively planted after his encounter with that girl. Yet, I feel like the show kind of forgot about him after he had his solo episode. The Gifted Graduation, however, really took advantage of Korn to the fullest. He was absolutely fantastic as a minor antagonist. I think this is in part due to Fiat's performance. His portrayal of Kon this season was a revelation. Kon's psychotic break was masterfully done. My only real issue with Kon this season was that I really felt like the plot twist near the end, Supat's apparent brainwashing of Kon to portray Paing, was just entirely unnecessary and cheapened the series as a whole. Kon already had motives to betray Paing. Viet's performance had me entirely convinced that Kon really did hate the Gifted. And for valid reasons too. It was interesting to see him act as a foil to Paing's ideology. And so for all of the questions Kon posed to Paing's altruistic beliefs to be simply boiled down to Kon being brainwashed, it's disappointing. Poon has the personality of dry toast for most of the series. I'm sorry, but it must be said. I really do like him near the end of episode 9, but Poon lacks the complexity and devil-may-care attitude that made me fall in love with him in the first season. I think what made him especially compelling in the first season was his emotional and mental instability as he grappled with his potential. His drive to be the best and make his father proud, coupled with the deterioration of his relationships as he tries and fails to keep his personalities under control, it's an immensely compelling and interesting narrative. Laugh all you want at the my me memes, but there's a reason why so many people cite episode 5 as their favorite from the first season. It's strange to me that Poon doesn't really struggle with his multiple personality disorder at all in The Gifted Graduation. I mean, Claire did help him stabilize and all that, but his stress-related issues just seemed to magically disappear. I wish The Gifted Graduation focused more on Poon's continuous journey to manage his personalities and his anxieties. Similar to Paing, Poon seems like a husk of his former self. Grace is cool as shit. She's frankly the only new character that captured my interest. I saw many people compare Time to Paing, but if we compare the original Golden Trio with Time, Grace, and Third, it's Grace who mirrors Paing the most. Both Grace and Paing struggled finding their potential and constantly degraded themselves. Both believed that they were chosen for the Gifted program by mistake, and both characters were later revealed to be incredibly powerful. Grace realizing her advantage as a quiet observer was definitely one of the show's highlights for me. Time was regrettably my least favorite addition to the cast. After watching a couple of episodes, I aptly named him the audience surrogate. That is, his character is utilized near the beginning of the series to catch us up on everything we've missed. He asks the questions we want answers to. What happened to the Gifted program? Did Paing really detonate a bomb within the school? Who are the anti-gifted? I actually thought this setup worked rather nicely and effectively filled the audience in on what happened during the time skip. But the issues start after the plot is fully established. Without the need for an audience surrogate, Time unfortunately loses his relevancy. It doesn't exactly help that he is painfully underdeveloped. Even the show itself forgot he existed after episode 6. He comes back for a brief moment in the finale, but I honestly didn't even realize he was gone. That's how forgettable he was. It's a real shame. His potential was incredibly interesting, and his character could have gone in a number of directions, personality-wise. Poem was written okay this season, but I do think he was painfully underutilized. What I especially enjoyed about Poem in The Gifted was the mystery and suspense that surrounded his character. It was only revealed in episode 10 that he was the trick up Supat's sleeve all along. He was the director's secret weapon to ensure he stayed on top of the food chain. He does have tired dad energy this season, which I appreciate, but his habit of switching sides this season utterly baffled me. Like, dude, Paing brought back your memories and made you realize that you were brainwashed? Why are you still helping Supat? He does explain that he feels it's helpless to fight back, but considering that Poom is fully aware of Supat's various crimes against humanity, that's a pretty weak excuse. Anyway, bottom line is I wish Poom's potential was showcased more. Shannon was my most anticipated character this season. Again, characters with tired dad energy own my whole heart, but he too was a bit of a letdown. I did enjoy his interactions with Paing in episode 6, but things started to go south after the big plot twist in episode 11. Of course, Poom's portrayal of Shannon and the erasure of Shannon's memories would inspire a dramatic shift in character, but the big plot twist Shannon secretly working for the director all along, came out of fucking nowhere. My mans was literally betrayed by his own best friend, and was still prepared to bite the bullet for him if the director's experiments were exposed. Shannon was characterized in the first season as altruistic, compassionate, and loyal. Granted, he's a bit less idealistic and a lot more jaded after Palm's betrayal, but that doesn't mean that his character should take a full 180 and become a revenge-hungry psycho. This plot twist is just so infuriating. Finally, I wish we had more interactions between Pang and Shannon. Pang mentioned wanting a mentor figure to Shannon, and then the writers just never made them interact again. God, it would have been so interesting to see Shannon and Pang working together as a team, and Shannon teaching Pang more about potentials. Also, Palm and Shannon were definitely in love, and the only reason they didn't get together is because the writers are cowards. My original plan for this video was to do a beat-by-beat rundown of the entire story, but then I looked at my 2-page summary of the series, and then I looked at my 10 pages of rewatch notes, and I got a headache. I mean, to scratch the tip of the iceberg, here's a handful of the many plot developments in The Gifted Graduation. Darwin uses Poon to help thwart Pang's efforts to expose the Ministry, because apparently Poon can now copy anyone's potential at any time, essentially making him a god with unlimited power. Shannon emerges from hiding to help Pang take down Korn, who's gone rogue after injecting the new gifted class with the virus. Korn commits suicide, but not really, because it was revealed that Korn's potential makes it impossible for him to die. Time is killed by the virus. The Ministry of Education commits genocide by tracking down gifted individuals and killing them in various grotesque ways. Pang learns that Time is still alive and is being treated for the virus in a secret bunker. Supot used to be sexy. The virus originated from Supot experimenting on his severely ill girlfriend. Pang discovers that the Supot shown in flashbacks is not actually Supot because the real Supot brainwashed his friend into assuming his identity. Supot convinces Pang to create a child army of gifted students with his mind control powers. Anyway, this is why I vetoed my original plan. This is The Gifted Graduation's fundamental flaw. There are so many diverging plots, so many twists and turns, that it is nearly impossible to keep track of what's actually happening. Not only does the show completely neglect some of its main characters, several subplots are completely abandoned and given no real closure whatsoever. Like, isn't the Minister of Education a literal mass murderer still on the loose after the series ends? Him, Miss Dodden, and the entire Ministry of Education, none of them ever suffer legal repercussions for attempting to use a lethal virus to control children. This is like a textbook example of writers biting off more than they can chew. There was an honest attempt to create a complex and compelling narrative about the Ministry of Education being the bigger evil. Yet, by the end of the series, the verdict our protagonist reaches is, to put it bluntly, students good, Supot bad. There was an interesting conversation to be had about the Ministry's role in perpetuating inequality, but the series simply couldn't afford to properly develop the storyline since it had to juggle so many smaller subplots. There's really only one aspect of the series' conclusion that I found personally satisfying: Kon. I won't lie, I did shed a tear when Mon said sweet dreams. Unfortunately, the show's frantic attempt to balance upwards of 10 subplots isn't its only downfall. No, the glaring issue that permeated almost the entire series was something I like to call info dumping. Simply put, info dumping is basically when a story relies on hefty amounts of dialogue or narration to relate information about the setting, characters, or plot to its audience. Hence the common phrase, show, don't tell. Everything is unceremoniously dumped into our laps all at once. Bottom line is, you don't have to tell your audience everything. Paradoxically, it's often more satisfying for your audience if they're partially left in the dark. That way, the audience can speculate on what will happen next, or what a character's true motives are, for example. Think about how prevalent fan theories are in fandom culture. The obscurement of certain details in a story invites intrigue, which in turn keeps your audience invested. Now, I know I just spent 2 minutes explaining why info dumping is bad, but hear me out. If used correctly, exposition can work to a show's advantage. In fact, The Gifted Season 1 is chock full of good info dumping. But today I want to focus on one bit of exposition in particular. So remember how I cited Shannon as my most anticipated character for The Gifted graduation? There's a reason for that. To me, the brief glimpses we got of his character from Season 1 were incredibly intriguing. And believe it or not, Shannon's involvement with the Gifted program is explained via info dumping. So why does it work? We get our first real glimpse of Shannon in episode 3 when Namtan discovers his old belongings and attempts to figure out why he resigned from the Gifted program. Both she and the audience are perplexed. Why would someone so thoroughly invested in the program quit so suddenly? But here's the catch. We aren't given a definitive answer to that question in episode 3. Instead, throughout the series, we are given bits and pieces of context and encouraged to piece together what happened ourselves. The key factor here is curiosity. By planting these bits of information throughout the series, the audience is prompted to ask why. Why did Shannon quit? Why was Namtan traumatized by what she saw? Or even, how does Pom connect to Shannon? We are left hanging on the edge of our seats for answers until the second to last episode. So when these questions are answered via flashbacks and relatively lengthy monologues, we don't feel it's clunky or slow or boring. To quote YouTube channel Savage Books, the events of the narrative cause curiosity, and well-delivered exposition demands the audience be curious. The story needs to do something that warrants an explanation in the first place. So in other words, the lengthy exposition in episode 12 wouldn't have worked if these questions concerning Shannon's character hadn't been effectively raised. Good exposition requires the audience to be hungry for answers. In this way, we don't mind the hefty amounts of dialogue and flashbacks. A quick note. I highly recommend Savage Book's video on Death Note's info dumping. It's absolutely brilliant, and he honestly explains how good exposition works better than I ever could. Hence, this section was heavily inspired by his video. Anyways, go check it out. So, switching gears a little, how does the Gifted graduation fail in writing good exposition? Let's take Supat's big reveal for an example. In a 15-minute flashback, Supat's plan to brainwash his friend into impersonating him is revealed via an extensive monologue from young Supat himself. This plot twist in itself is bewildering to me since the whole Supat being a puppet of the ministry narrative added a lot of complexity and nuance to the story. To backtrack and say, actually, Supat was working with the ministry all along seems like a pretty major regression in terms of plot and character. Anyways, not really a huge fan of the writing here. Moving on. This info dump really doesn't work in the show's favor, and here's why. The events of the show never prompt us to question Supat's identity. There is no event in the narrative that sparks our curiosity or warrants an explanation. To make matters worse, young Supat takes this opportunity to explain his evil plan in truly excruciating detail. This ginormous chunk of exposition feels about as subtle as a bull in a china shop. To quote Savage Books again, by doing this you are delivering explanations to questions that the audience doesn't have yet. and in a jam-packed narrative, that kind of thing sticks out like a sore thumb. And unfortunately, this issue plagues the entire series, especially in its latter half. I don't really take pleasure in saying this, but the confrontation in episode 9 between Pang and the Ministry was genuinely hard to watch. It's literally just a solid 10 minutes of Pang standing in front of Miss Daden, explaining the Ministry's scheme to control Thailand's student population. Also, wait a minute, why would Pang need to explain this to Miss Daden, who literally devised the plan herself? It's a completely useless bit of exposition that really exemplifies my biggest problem with this entire show. Upon my first viewing of The Gifted Graduation's final episode, I felt that something was off, but I eventually managed to pinpoint what irked me so much. It was, to put it delicately, cartoonishly one-dimensional. I hesitate to say this, but it almost felt too cheery and lighthearted of an ending for a show with such dark subject matter. It harkens back to what I mentioned earlier about the plot. The conclusion the protagonist reaches by the end of the series is simply, students good, Supot bad. The show lost so much narrative potential after it abandoned the whole Supot is a puppet subplot. Call me crazy, but it would have been extremely interesting to see Supot as this morally gray character who receives some form of redemption by the finale. But no, the show never genuinely explores the possibility of the Ministry being the final boss, per se. Nope. Supot is basically the amalgamation of evil, and the way the students win is by simply taking him down, instead of examining the larger problems that plague the education system. The stakes of the show haven't been elevated at all, relative to the first season. Finally, I guess I don't have that big of an issue with the whole everyone has powers element to the finale, but it was a perplexing choice and raises a lot of questions. How will this solve anything exactly? Since people can opt out of having powers, will they still be treated as subhuman? What if the school and/or society at large constructs a new hierarchy based on whose powers are quote-unquote better? What frustrates me the most is that The Gifted's first season truly warranted a continuation of the series, yet despite this, the ending still feels empty. Failure to solve conflict does not a bad ending make, but it is trickier to simultaneously have your protagonist fail and give your audience a satisfying conclusion. This is why The Gifted finale being practically flawless is a remarkable feat. By all accounts, an unambiguous victory for our protagonist should have been a satisfying conclusion for this series. The problem is, all Pang did to defeat Supot this season was use his mind control powers, which shouldn't have even been possible since we established in season 1 that people with the same potential can't use their powers on one another. Anyway, in the end, Pang's journey as a character, the development of his potential, and even the friends he gained along the way are completely irrelevant. So yes, the Gifted students were victorious, but not because of anything that occurred in the series or any individual choice a character made, which is why the students' victory feels unearned. Supot was technically defeated via an enormous plot hole. I would argue that the thesis statement of The Gifted is as follows: there is power in numbers. We know exactly why Pang failed to defeat Supot in season 1. He acted alone. Without his friend's support, there was only so much he could do. So for Pang to take down Supot using his potential and his potential alone is not only inconsistent with the show's logic, it completely contradicts the message of the first season. If anything, Pang seems more antagonistic towards his friends in this season. Entire episodes revolve around infighting within the Gifted class. So if the Gifted can be summarized as the power of many, the Gifted graduation can be summarized as the power of one. This season had so much promise, and it just physically pains me to see such a brilliant premise wasted. I saw brief glimpses of the show's former greatness with Khan's betrayal and Wave's character development, but that's all they were. Glimpses. But I won't waste too much time talking about hypotheticals and what could have been. Let's address the elephant in the room. Did the failures of this season worsen my opinion of the original series? I see the original Gifted series as an entirely separate work at this point. Its characters are immensely likable and teeming with personality. Elements of suspense, hilarity, tenderness, and mystery are all expertly woven into the story. The plot, while having its fair share of twists and turns, remains comprehensible. It's still a nearly perfect show, regardless of its sequel's shortcomings. I don't think there's any real consensus on the Gifted graduation from what I've seen. People seem pretty divided overall, but I think that's healthy, and I enjoy seeing such a diverse range of takes on the show. Do you have any praises or criticisms for the Gifted graduation that I didn't cover? Please comment down below and tell me what you think. Even though the show was a disappointment for me, I can still appreciate the producers, writers, and actors who put their heart and soul into creating such an immensely complex series.